whatever you were gonna do. Cause it's time for Nick and the crew to tell you all the lore that you never knew about your favorite media, my dude. Stuff you're too lazy to look up. Nick and the boys gonna hook you up. From Halo and Batman to religious stuff. Lorecast is starting, so shut the hell up.
The year is 2009. A young original Nick is in his living room. The whir of the family Windows Vista machine boots up a disc. A video starts to play. A radio boots up and crackles with the start of a song. The song starts with the lyrics, "I don't want to set the world on fire." Ironic considering the camera pulls out to show the radios in a blown-out bus in the middle of a destroyed Washington, D.C. This was my first experience in the world of Fallout. After that, Fallout has become one of the most influential games to me, only being topped by Kingdom Hearts and Halo. In this series of Lorecast, we are going to be discussing the basic lore for this video and any weird and obscure Fallout lore that I can think of, spanning all the Fallout media. Most of this research is going to come from the Fallout Wiki, with a lot of help from videos by Oxhorn and Shoddycast, as well as anything I can think of while playing the games. So, like I said, this is going to cover weird and obscure lore. If you want to listen to or watch videos about real lore that is substantial to the world itself, I really suggest Oxhorn and Shoddycast. They have fantastic series within the world of Fallout. I'm only covering the basic world right here from my point of view, or not from my point of view, but from my research, because there are so many videos out there. But in order to discuss it, the weird random lore that I can find, I think that we need to discuss the things that make Fallout in order that we have a grasp from my research point of view. Or you can also look at some Oxhorn videos or Shoddycast and come back to mine. The choice is up to you. In order to discuss the basic world of Fallout, I believe we need to talk about an event that makes Fallout, Fallout. The Divergence. The world of Fallout before the Divergence takes place exactly as our timeline takes place until just after World War II. So the Divergence is a break from our timeline in history. The Divergence takes place mostly around the 1950s and 60s, with some things popping earlier. With the Mothership Zeta DLC from Fallout 3, we find that the Zetan aliens have been kidnapping people from as early as around 16th century Japan. And as Oxhorn puts it, the Divergence is more of an ongoing event than a singular moment in time. And in this world, the Red Scare of communism never ended. Leading up to the Great War, I'm going to leave what the Great War is to the next section, but we need to talk about some things that lead up to it. The crude oil reserves around the world are drying up, leaving the European countries to form one big one called the European Commonwealth. They invade the Middle East, and this is called the Resource Wars. And after they invade the Middle East and get all the oil, it's back in their central location, and it turns into civil war, because after it's gone from the Middle East, all they have is each other, and they're fighting over who gets it, leaving Alaska, the final place in the entire world that has any oil rigs left. The Soviet Union falls in power, leaving China to take over as the communist power. China invades Alaska to take control over the last of the crude oil. This is called the Sino-American War. The war rages for 11 years, with the U.S. invading mainland China, leading the U.S. to clear out the remainder of Chinese in Alaska. The war was over, at least on the American front. While war was raging, some individuals and groups started making plans to preserve life. One of these groups is Vault-Tec. Vault-Tec, with the aid of the United States military, built nuclear fallout shelters across the United States. Mr. House is another one of these few with plans to colonize space after foreseeing this war, and the Enclave put the most politically powerful individuals off some oil rigs in the Atlantic Ocean. Each one of these vaults or factions can get their own episode if there's some weird lore hidden in there. And while the resource wars were raging, the US annexed all of Canada, making it one big country, in order to fend off communist China, but most Canadians just believed it was a way for them to control that oil just a little bit more. So now we get to the Great War. On October 23rd, 2077, China and America would launch nuclear missiles at each other for a solid 2 hours. Many terminal entries throughout the games describe what was happening just before war broke out, and some of Fallout 4 showing the first moments of war at the beginning of the game, with a terminal at the switchboard showing the DEFCON status of 2077, starting with January showing an all clear of Anchorage, making it DEFCON 3, and then 8 months later in October, showing that there were confirmed hits in Pennsylvania and New York, and then it going offline. So those are only 2 examples of the Great War. If there's any weird lore that I can find, it's going to get its own episode at some point. But moving on to the technology. So it is a divergence from our timeline, and in this timeline, the transistor was never invented, making vacuum tubes and tapes and bulky wearables the technology of the Fallout world. Clunky robots, ray guns, mutants, the things that people in the 50s and 60s thought that our future would look like. Think of the Jetsons or early Doctor Who. And power armor is a lot more bulky, powered by nuclear fusion cells, and it's bulkier and heavier than that of Halo, which is sleek and very form-fitting. Another thing that sets it apart from our timeline and our America is the Commonwealths. So, in another effect of that divergence, in 1969 in the Fallout world, all 50 states unified and broke up into 13 superstates known as Commonwealths. This was a design choice by Leonard Boyarsky, one of the masterminds behind the first Fallout game. He believed it would help show a bigger difference between our timeline and the Fallout timeline. And then lastly, I want to talk about the architecture and design. As mentioned earlier, the technology is a futuristic idea of what people in the 50s and 60s thought we would have by our time. Art Deco, ray gun Gothic, and brutalist design with some American colonial being splashed in. A lot of references also come from pop culture movies. So these movies get a lot of references throughout the games. We have Star Wars, Mad Max, and Blade Runner. So those are just to name a few. Blade Runner is the main focus of Fallout 4. I would say that it's not beat for beat, obviously, but there's a lot of similarities coming from synthetic humans and humans trying to figure out who is who. And then there are some skeleton vignettes on top of roofs that show one of the most famous scenes of that movie. And Mad Max, with the design of a lot of the Raider clothes, as well as a lone hero with their dog in Fallout 3 and Fallout 4, and then with one of the companions you can get in New Vegas. Now, to me, I say this is a fantastic, basic beginning depth into the weird and obscure Fallout lore that I'm going to get into. I believe that each faction, each vault, the Great War itself, every creature, and any of that deserves its own episode if it has weird and obscure lore. A lot of research that I got came from the Fallout Wiki, with a lot also coming from Oxhorn and Shoddycast. I will leave links to their channels in the description of the YouTube version and show notes of the audio version. Lorecast would not be possible without friends like Devin of Beetlemilk, who made the intro song, and Beetlemilk Publishing, who made the artwork. You can find him at beetlemilk.com and Beetlecast on all of your podcast apps. Oxhorn and Shoddycast, like I was saying, you can find out them on YouTube. Chronicler177, who is a fantastic influence of mine, and Podcast Evolved, one of the first ones that I started making podcasts because of them. So please check out all of their links provided in the description of the YouTube version and show notes. So like I was saying, this is not going to be an in-depth look of my research of the Fallout universe. If you want that, I'm begging you, Oxhorn. He has fantastic, very well thought out, very in-depth, long videos ready to go to show you. He's been doing this for years, and I am just a drop in the bucket. But I believe Lorecast functions best when I look at the weird, stupid, obscure lore or things that are lesser known. So thank you so much for listening and watching, and we will get into it in this series of Fallout on Lorecast. Thank you so much, and I will see you all in the next episode.